I want to share with you some quotes that I found humorous, and I think you'll recognize the theme of these quotes pretty quickly. The first one is by a lady named Helen Gurley Brown. She said, "Money, if it does not bring you happiness, but will at least help you be miserable in comfort." Another one by Bob Hope said this, "A bank is a place that will lend you money if you can prove that you don't need it." An IRS auditor said this one, says the trick is to stop thinking of it as your money. Oscar Wilde said anyone who lives within their means suffers from a lack of imagination. Ralph Waldo Emerson said, "Money often costs too much." Earl Wilson, "If you think nobody cares if you're alive, try missing a couple of car payments." Max Amsterdam, "Business is the art of extracting money from another man's pocket without resorting to violence." Joe Lewis, "I don't like money, actually, but it quiets my nerves." Will Smith said, "Too many people spend money they don't have," I'll start over. Will Smith said, "Too many people spend money they haven't earned to buy things they don't want to impress people they don't like." An unknown author said, "Money can't buy happiness, but it can buy you the kind of misery you prefer." Ralph Waldo Emerson again said, "Money often costs too much." Malcolm Forbes said, I made my money the old-fashioned way. I was very nice to a wealthy relative right before they died." And I'll end with this one. It's from the Washington Post. They did a contest, and they asked people to give a definition of words. And the word they put out was intoxication. And this is how someone defined the word intoxication: euphoria at getting a refund from the IRS, which lasts until you realize it was your money to start with. We've come to the point in our series in Wisdom where we got to talk about money, where we're going to talk about what the Bible teaches in its wisdom literature and Proverbs about money. And we're particularly looking here at poverty and riches, because the Proverbs talks a lot about this. And I want to remind you of what we've been talking about in this whole section for several weeks now, about kind of the basis of this wisdom we have in Proverbs. Why this wisdom and what is the benefit of this? And I remind you of Proverbs chapter 10, verse 12. Proverbs 10, verse 12 says this, "Hatred stirs up quarrels, but love makes up for all offenses." You see, what we've been looking at for weeks now is the wisdom of Proverbs teaching us how to live in a way that honors and pleases God and man. And it's actually practically God saying, listen, here's the wisdom that's been collected over time to teach you how you can love your fellow man in an effective way. And so today we're going to talk about how we can love people with our money, right? And what principles lead to poverty and what principles lead to riches. And so we want to think of this and we want to unpack it and kind of pull it apart. There are at least 45 different verses, the 45 different Proverbs from Proverbs 10 through chapter 31 that talk about riches and poverty. And in 15 of them, 1/3 of them come in chapters 22 and 28, so they're quite extensive. And what I'm going to do here, because it's kind of a big picture, and we must look at it in its totality, and we're going to try and understand it and understand some principles from it. I'm just going to kind of rapid fire hit off some Proverbs, some ones that I think are important. And then I'm going to bring out some principles about what it means to be poor and what Proverbs teaches us about poverty and how we get there and how we can get out. And then what Proverbs teaches us about riches and the responsibility that comes with riches. And these are valuable things that we can look at. So I want to share these with you. We're going to put them up on the screen. You can see them. I encourage you to go look through these things as you go on and ponder this in more depth. We start off in Proverbs 10, verse 4. It says, "Lazy people are soon poor. Hard workers get rich." A dichotomy, right? And there are different things that we talk about, right? And Proverbs kind of deals with all of this and tries to give us a picture. Because some people will simply say, well, it's their own fault that they don't have anything. But it's not that simple, and we'll see that more as we come along. There are people who live in a bad situation that are absolutely hard workers. And there are people who are lazy that absolutely have resources. And so Proverbs gives this simple saying that, hey, hard work pays off, basically. But it's not as simple as that. So we read on. Proverbs 10:22, the blessing of the Lord makes a person rich, and he adds no sorrow with it. Some people are just blessed, and we'll talk about that more. The rich can pay a ransom for their lives, but the poor won't even get threatened. That's Proverbs 13:8. With riches there comes some responsibility. Proverbs 14:23, work brings profit, but mere talk leads to poverty. Proverbs 14:31, those who oppress the poor insult their maker, but helping the poor honors him. Proverbs 19:17, if you help the poor, you are lending to the Lord. He will repay you. Proverbs 21:5, good planning and hard work lead to prosperity, but hasty shortcuts lead to poverty. Proverbs 22:1, choose a good reputation over riches. Being held in high esteem is better than silver or gold. Proverbs 22:4, true humility and fear of the Lord lead to riches, honor, and long life. Proverbs 22:9, blessed are those who are generous because they feed the poor. Proverbs 22:16, a person who gets ahead by oppressing the poor or by showering gifts on the rich will end in poverty. Proverbs 22 verses 22 and 23 says, don't rob the poor just because you can or exploit the needy in court, for the Lord is their defender. He will ruin anyone who ruins them. Proverbs 28 verse 8 says, income from charging high interest rate will end up in the pocket of someone who is kind to the poor. Proverbs 28 verse 11 says, rich people may think they are wise, but a poor person with discernment can see right through them. Proverbs 28:19, a hard worker has plenty of food, but a person who chases fantasies ends up in poverty. Proverbs 28:27 says, whoever gives to the poor will lack nothing, but those who close their eyes to poverty will be cursed. Proverbs 28:7 says, the godly care about the rights of the poor. The wicked don't care at all. And finally, I will end with this, and I like this kind of little poetic saying right at the end of Proverbs. It says this in Proverbs 30:7-9. O God, I beg two favors from you. Let me have them before I die. First, help me never tell a lie. Second, give me neither riches nor poverty. Give me just enough to satisfy my needs. For if I grow rich, I may deny you and say, who is the Lord? And if I am too poor, I may steal and thus insult God's holy name. A lot to say, a lot to unpack. There's a lot that the authors and the wisdom of Proverbs brings together about how we interact with other people, right? What brings wealth, what brings poverty, and how can we look at that? And I want to start off with the idea of being poor, right? And I don't know who you are or where you are or what place you see yourself in life. You may be content. You may consider yourself, I'm not rich or poor, I'm kind of in the middle. And it is somewhat of a subjective thing. A modern, like middle class, wage earner here in the United States would be considered wildly wealthy in some other countries. And it's very kind of subjective. So we understand that. And I think one of the principles we'll all be able to learn here, and we'll get to this at the end, is that no matter where you are in life, you can be generous and help someone with less. So rich or poor, I think that is a hard thing to designate, but we're going to look at some principles that lead to poverty or riches according to Proverbs, and then what is our responsibility to do. And the first one, and we saw this throughout the thing, there's the reality that being lazy doesn't work out. I like to kind of watch and study comedians, mostly because they're funny, but also I'm fascinated by the mind of a comedian, because comedians, they look at the world differently, and they speak what I would call truth that we all know, but we don't articulate, and they say it in a funny way. In comedy, you may think of something as silly or that the comedians are lazy because they sleep all day and are up all night and this thing, but if you really look at successful comedians and you hear them, there's an incredible work ethic that goes into what they do, because it's very much a give and take, a transactional thing, and they work really hard. And I found that in studying, and what they say, it may seem nonchalant or it may seem off the cuff, but it's actually very thought out and very specific, and there's a lot of work that goes into that. It's just an example of something that we wouldn't necessarily think of high-level successful comedians as hard workers, because they portray a lot of times kind of the opposite. But actually behind the scenes, you find a lot of thought and a lot of purpose and a lot of things going into what they do. A lot of what we call in our world today hustle. They're hustling really hard, but there's this reality that hard work, right, brings promises, but laziness brings something else. And the truth is, we probably all want to be lazy, right? I've sat down on my couch and fantasized what it's about to, man, I'd love to just find that $150 million lottery ticket just magically end up in my mailbox. And a part of that is, and I could do whatever I want, and sometimes I want to do nothing. But Proverbs says that laziness can lead to poverty. And so we want to kind of think about that. And then there's another thing that says that leads to poverty, and it's too much talk. Last week we talked about how we can use our words and our tongue to bless others. And Proverbs teaches that when we are just running our mouths all the time, it leads to poverty. Too much talk, and then this idea of too much talk and fantasy, right? These get-rich-quick schemes, and they're all over, right? You've heard people, and I'm not talking bad about people that are telling you, hey, I want to tell you about this great business opportunity where in 15 hours a week you can make an extra $2,500 a month or whatever the thing is. There are a lot of people. The reality is the people who are in those type of marketing ideas are really a specific group of people that are really good, again, at the hustle and are extremely able to kind of just move through, because it's only a certain type of personality that generally is successful in there, and you may have that type of personality, and that's fantastic. And we'll get to if you have been blessed with a personality to be successful in a network marketing type of environment, that's a great thing. But it's sometimes we look at it as fantasy, and it's almost never as simple as we like to make it. There's hard work involved, right? And when we try, and the fantasy oftentimes is that we get the results that we desire without the work that goes into that. Another thing that leads to poverty, according to Proverbs, is shortcuts. It's trying to take the easy way. It's trying to skimp on the way things should be done. And there's a lot of shortcuts we can try and take in life. There are people who cheated their way through school, right? There are people who quoted something on a bid for a job and just took 10% off. Proverbs says that leads to poverty. It leads to being poor. And so there are these principles of dishonesty, of being slack, right? Of going into these things that Proverbs teaches leads to poor. But then there's also oppression. Proverbs clearly states that there are people with power that use that power to keep others in a low situation, to keep others with reduced resources. And this is something we have to talk about. We have to be realistic about in our world today, because there are all these things, and sometimes we see a lazy trait in someone, or we see somebody who's maybe trying to get rich quick, and we say, this is that. But we also realize those may be a small part of the reason for their situation, when a large part may be that there are others that in their life are kind of holding them in that situation. And there is a cycle of poverty in our world today, and it's hard to break, particularly when it's something that someone grew up in. A lot of times, and you have these examples, right? You have some people, particularly we see this with athletes who grow up in an underprivileged situation but have athletic gifts and may become a professional athlete and make a bunch of money. A lot of times there are a bunch of people back home that they grew up with that are sucking that money right out of them, and when they stop making this income, they go broke. That's an example of power. There are other people who are coercing others, right? And so oppression is a reality. And the question we need to ask is how can we as the people of God help those who are oppressed? How can we as Christians help those who are in need and who are being oppressed, and help them break out of that cycle, whether it be they have a bad thing? I just saw this crazy idea that, and I don't know a lot about the music business, but I was reading an article just yesterday where Taylor Swift, the rights to her first 6 albums were sold by someone else for $300 million. an artist who wrote and performed and produced all this music got into a bad deal where her own music was sold by someone else and somebody else got $300 million off her profit. We live in a world where people take advantage of. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm not saying Taylor Swift is in a bad situation or is horribly oppressed. I'm just giving an example of what oppression goes. But then there's also laziness, right? There's also, no, I'm sorry, laziness. There's also, you can be poor in your means, but be wise, right? And it said this in the one proverb there. It says some poor people will be able to see through the schemes of those with more. And so even if you find yourself in a less than privileged situation, there are a lot of smart people that don't have a lot. There's a lot of practical wisdom out there and benefit to be had from people who may not have a lot of money, or they may not have a lot of things, they may not have a lot of resources, but they have a lot to offer, and they may be rich in wisdom and rich in kindness, although they are poor in means. Now some principles of being wealthy that we found here in Proverbs. The first thing is that hard work comes with it. Proverbs is clear that those who work hard receive the efforts of their work. In general, it says when you are working and you are doing well, there are riches over there. And with this work comes planning, right? A lot of times we like to show up without planning, without thinking about what we should do or what can we do. Proverbs says that when you work hard and you plan, there's prosperity, right? You will prosper. And again, it's somewhat of a scale. So it's unlikely that anyone hearing me is going to prosper to the level of Jeff Bezos. There's only one person that's ever prospered to the level of Jeff Bezos in existence. So unlikely, you work hard and you plan, you're not going to be worth $100 billion or whatever. But you can be successful, right? And you can gain riches. You can gain money. You can gain resources. Hard work, planning, important things. Second reality is Proverbs says that God blesses people, and he blesses people. Sometimes he gives, and we find this in Scripture, that God gives his blessing, and sometimes that blessing is very much monetary. Sometimes he blesses people with a hard work ethic and knowledge and wisdom and skill and in all of these different things, and we can talk about this, and the scriptural point is that God gives people talents, and when they use them, they are blessed. But sometimes simply the blessing of God is on a certain person, and that results in having resources, having riches, having wealth. And that's something we should celebrate, right? And when we see someone who we think, man, they have a lot going on, maybe God has chosen to bless them that way in awesome, right? We should be excited for that person and not envious and not think that there's some scheme. Because the reality is that not only blessing, but sometimes there is riches come through oppression, right? This other side. Sometimes the poor are oppressed, and you have somebody who's making a lot of money by oppressing the poor. We live in a sinful world that is happening. But there's also some things that come with money. There's stress, and there's responsibility. I like the proverb, and it was Proverbs 13:8 says this: "The rich can pay a ransom for their lives, but the poor won't even get threatened." Right? If you've got a lot of money, you've got a certain responsibility. There are people that are probably trying to take it in a dishonest way. If you don't have anything, and people probably leave you alone. There's a stress and responsibility that comes with resources and means and riches. And there are some commandments. One is to be generous. Proverbs absolutely teaches that if you have means, you are to be generous, particularly to those with less than you. It's easy to be generous to our family. It's easy to be generous with those we like. It's easy to be generous to those who can be generous in return. But Proverbs calls us to true generosity, and that is generosity to give to someone else in need without any strings attached. And it also calls us to be fair. When you are in a position of power because of your resources, you may have an opportunity to get the best possible deal with someone who has less. But is that deal fair? Proverbs calls us to fairness and generosity. I want to close with this. And it's what Jesus said in Matthew chapter 25. Jesus gave a parable about how we are to treat each other. And when we're talking about riches and poverty, I think it's important to remember these words. Jesus says this: "When the Son of Man comes in his glory and all the angels with him. Then he will sit upon his glorious throne. All the nations will be gathered in his presence, and he will separate the people as a shepherd separates sheep from goats. He will say to the sheep on his right hand and the goats on his left hand. So he'll separate. There's this picture of Jesus at the end. And this is what he says, and this is what he teaches about our resources and what we can do. Then the king will say to those on his right, "Come, you who are blessed by my Father, inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the creation of the world. For I was hungry, and you fed me. I was thirsty, and you gave me a drink. I was a stranger, and you invited me into your home. I was naked, and you gave me clothes. I was sick, and you cared for me. I was in prison, and you visited me." And this is the incredible point here. So Jesus talks about all these good things that these people, right, that are coming into his kingdom have done, but this is the reply. This is the reply of that group of people, the people on his right. It calls them the righteous. It says, "Then these righteous ones," in verse 37, "will reply, 'Lord, Lord, when did we see you hungry and feed you, or thirsty and give you something to drink, or a stranger and show you hospitality, or naked and give you clothes? When did we ever see you sick or in prison and visit you?' And the king will say, 'I tell you the truth. When you did it for one of the least of these, my brothers and sisters, you were doing it for me.'" And then he shares the opposite. Then the king will turn to those on the left and say, Away with you, you cursed ones, into eternal fire prepared for the devil and his demons. For I was hungry, and you didn't feed me. I was thirsty, and you didn't give me a drink. I was a stranger, and you didn't invite me into your home. I was naked, and you didn't clothe me. I was sick and in prison, and you didn't visit me." Then they will reply, "Lord, when did we ever see you hungry or thirsty or a stranger or naked or sick or in prison and not help you?" And he will answer, "I tell you the truth. When you have refused to help the least of these, my brothers and sisters, you are refusing to help me." And they will go away into eternal punishment, but the righteous into eternal life. The ultimate reality and wisdom of Scripture is that regardless of where you are, whether you categorize yourself as rich or poor, whether you are in that situation because of the oppression of others, the blessings of God, whatever you see or whatever resonates for you as you hear this scriptural teaching today, there's one thing that transcends them all. And that's that you can be of help to those in need. Maybe you are handy, right? And you don't have much, but you see a rich person broken down the side of the road and you can help them. Maybe you are wealthy and you have a lot, and you know a poor person who needs a business loan, who needs some food, who needs some care, who needs some training so that they can be more prosperous. You're being called by Jesus to share his kindness to the world by using your skills, your abilities, your resources, whatever they are, in generosity to others. 2 questions I want you to consider this week. As you go from here, what things are you doing that might lead to riches or poverty? We've talked about some stuff. Is there laziness in your life, right? Is it leading you to poverty? Is there hard work, right? Parse this out. How can you learn? How can you develop? How can you apply these principles to your life? And then the second question is, how can you make it a priority to help those who are poor? How can you make that a priority in your life? I share one thing before we go. And this is just good advice. With whatever your resources are, particularly the monetary ones, when you get paid, you will have a better life if you do these 3 things in this order. Whatever you get, the first thing you do is you decide, how much am I going to give? How much am I going to be charitable with? The second thing is, how much am I going to save? Set aside what you save. And then lastly, spend. If you do that, I believe you will be blessed, you will be on your way to riches, and you will be blessing those around you. Have a wonderful week. God bless you.